They don't tell you this in history class, the battle itself. That was often the safest part of medieval warfare for a common soldier. Your chances of survival plummeted, spiraled, the instant your line broke and the primal sprint for survival began. For centuries we've glorified the charge, the shield wall, the strategic genius. Yet even in defeat, organised combat offered a strange, brutal kind of safety. Men stood shoulder to shoulder, a wall of wood and steel, spears bristling outwards, a collective will to live. Then it shattered. One man turned, then another. Panic became a torrent. The formation dissolved, individual soldiers became isolated targets. This wasn't honourable combat. It was a hunt, vicious and unrelenting, the moment an army broke ranks and ran. Medieval accounts, unearthed from dusty scrolls, paint a horrifying picture. Some engagements saw as many as 13,000 people killed or captured during the retreat, not during the fierce, face-to-face struggle, but in the relentless, one-sided chase that followed. 13,000 souls hunted down like animals, not falling in glorious combat, but in terror and desperate flight. Make no mistake, hunt is no poetic embellishment. It was a calculated strategy, a cold, efficient extermination. The moment an army fractured and fled, light cavalry was unleashed to run down fleeing infantry. Imagine yourself exhausted from hours of fighting, lungs burning, weighed down by armour, slogging through mud or dense forest. Behind you, the thunder of hooves growing louder, closer, an inescapable drumbeat of doom. You cannot outrun a horse, not ever. The route became a literal conveyor belt of death. Defence was impossible, counter-attack a fantasy, surrender an unoffered luxury. One moment desperate hope, the next, a lance in your back, a sword slicing through your neck. Historical records, far from exaggeration, describe roads choked with bodies, streams literally running red with blood. This was the grim reality when thousands of men were cut down in confined spaces, desperate to escape their fate. Medieval commanders deliberately held back cavalry for this specific, brutal phase. They understood with chilling pragmatism that the retreat was where the true efficiency of killing lay. This was their prime opportunity to rack up the body count to ensure the enemy could not regroup, reform their lines, or return for a second round. It was about decisive victory, cemented in blood. During battle, it was a messy back and forth. You might wound a foe, he might wound you, but in the rout it was pure, unadulterated slaughter. Pursuers had every incentive to kill as many as possible. Every dead enemy represented tangible safety for their own side, a threat eliminated permanently, a future challenge averted. Eliminating meant killing everyone they could catch without hesitation. Survivors, haunted long after, often recounted the retreat as being far worse than the battle itself. At least in direct combat, you felt a fighting chance, however slim, to defend your life. Running, however, meant turning your back on merciless killers on horseback, knowing every second could be your absolute last. The choice was not yours to make. The sheer psychological terror of that chase, the feeling of being hunted, of impending doom stretching for miles, might have overshadowed even the raw physical danger of the battle line. If, by some near impossible miracle, you evaded immediate pursuit, slipped into the tree line or collapsed into a ditch, congratulations. You had just entered the second, equally terrifying phase of the post-battle nightmare. Now, you are critically wounded, bleeding profusely, utterly exhausted, and likely separated from your unit, alone in a hostile landscape. But the danger hasn't passed. It has merely shifted its insidious form. There will be others still looking for you. The retreat system was devastatingly effective. Military historians argue it was the single most lethal aspect of pre-gunpowder warfare. More lethal than disease, more lethal than prolonged sieges, and more lethal than decisive clashes, intricate strategies, grand formations. But the true meat grinder, the relentless, impersonal horror, was the chaos that erupted the moment organisation broke down. Most soldiers, we now know, didn't die in structured, honourable combat. They died running away, a blade in the back, drowning in a river while desperately trying to escape their pursuers. There is no glory in that, no honour, no vestige of heroism, just sheer, unadulterated terror and the finality of a meaningless death. Perhaps that is precisely why we rarely speak of it, because it is too honest, too brutal, too stark a reflection of what war truly is beneath all its romanticised veils. Let's say you defied the odds. You didn't drown in a river, didn't feel the lance of a pursuing horseman. You escaped the slaughter of the retreat, only to lie broken on the battlefield itself. Perhaps an arrow pierced your leg, a sword sliced deep, or you were simply trampled beneath the chaotic churn of battle. Now, you are on the ground. You are not dead. Not yet. You are screaming, bleeding, perhaps a limb mangled beyond recognition, an arm hanging by a sinew, a leg crushed. Under a fallen horse. Your world is pain, a white-hot agony that consumes every thought. You might, in your delirium, mercy blades. Their purpose was singular, brutal, and horrifyingly efficient. To finish off the wounded, all of them, one by one. The misericord was a weapon of chilling precision, not a broad. The pain is unimaginable. Medieval wounds were grotesque, compound fractures, severed limbs, gut wounds spilling forth your life. There is no morphine, no antibiotics, no shock trauma team to whisk you away. You are fully conscious. You are screaming, begging, perhaps praying. Then a figure looms over you, kneels down. Without a single word, with a practiced, detached motion, they drive that thin blade through your eye socket directly into your brain. That, in the context of medieval warfare, was mercy. Historical sources, with a strange detachment, often attempted to frame this practice as compassionate, and perhaps, given the utter lack of medical knowledge or effective treatment in the medieval era, it genuinely held a twisted form of empathy. If you sustained a gut wound in the year 1346, your fate was sealed. You would die over the next 3 or 4 agonizing days, slowly succumbing to infection, sepsis, and unimaginable suffering. From that bleak perspective, a swift, decisive death, though terrifying in its arrival, might indeed have been preferable to days of torment. But we must not romanticize this. We are speaking of men, often veterans themselves, walking a battlefield, systematically executing thousands of wounded, conscious men who were openly begging for help, for water, for anything but the blade. And here is the truly dark undercurrent. Mercy was not the sole motivator. There was also cold, hard practicality. Wounded soldiers, especially enemy wounded, presented an array of immediate problems. They required care, therefore served multiple chilling purposes all at once. It delivered a merciful end to the dying. It efficiently cleared the battlefield. For one grim task, efficiently killing helpless, wounded human beings. This fusion of exquisite artistry and occupied with the more honourable business of negotiating ransoms for captured aristocrats. No, this grim work fell to the common soldiers, the sergeants, perhaps even camp followers. These were the individuals who had just survived a brutal, harrowing battle, likely shaken to their core, and now they were tasked with walking among the dying, stabbing wounded men in the face through their eye sockets into their chests. That kind of psychological burden, the indelible stain of such an act, rarely appears in the pristine medieval chronicles. But you know intuitively that it was there, scarring souls long after the battlefield was cleared. There's another chilling reality. Not every soldier, given mercy, was actually truly dying. Sometimes men were finished off simply because they were in the way, or because the army was moving out unable to transport prisoners, or just because no one wanted the hassle of dealing with them. The term mercy provided a convenient moralistic cover for what was often just expedient murder. If a wounded soldier appeared too poor to offer a ransom, and too gravely injured or inconvenient to be kept as a prisoner, then the efficient blade of the misericorde solved that problem with cold finality. What truly disturbs me about the coup de grace is the way language has been allowed to sanitize our understanding of what actually happened. Mercy killing sounds almost noble, imbued with a sense of compassion. But when you truly strip away the linguistic varnish, when you actually contemplate what this meant, thousands of wounded soldiers having their lives ended by strangers with knives, it ceases to be anything but execution. Mass execution of the wounded, wrapped in a deceptively comforting linguistic bow to make it acceptable, to make it palatable. Remove the medieval terminology, and you are left with something utterly horrific, a systematic brutality. And yet, it was considered normal. Standard operating procedure. That, above all else, is what gets me. Not merely that it happened, but that everyone involved, from the highest general to the lowest foot soldier, simply agreed. This was fine. This was just how things were done. The battle is over. The last desperate screams of the routed have faded into silence. The wounded have been dealt their grim mercy. For a brief eerie moment, the battlefield goes quiet, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of fear. But not for long, because Phase 3 begins with the swift, silent descent of the scavengers. Within hours, sometimes even while fighting still raged on other parts of the sprawling field, they would begin their work. When I speak of scavengers, I mean everyone. Camp followers, local peasants, soldiers from the victorious army, and even professional looters who literally followed armies from campaign to campaign, drawn by the promise of death and plunder. Every single one of them wanted a piece of what lay scattered across that field. A medieval battlefield was not merely a place of death. It was an economic opportunity, a massive windfall of unimaginable wealth. Every dead soldier represented a trove of equipment, clothing, weapons, armour, jewellery, coins, and countless personal items. All of it simply lying there, ripe for the taking. Medieval equipment was astronomically expensive. A full suit of armour could easily cost more than a peasant would earn in an entire lifetime. A well-made sword represented months, even years of wages. Even the humble clothes worn by common soldiers held value, for everything was meticulously handmade, every thread and buckle precious in an age of scarcity. The systematic stripping of the dead was not some ghoulish side activity, it was a major calculated economic event. Research indicates that within hours, bodies were often left completely naked, utterly stripped bare. Everything was taken: armour, helmets, boots, belts, shirts, pants, even undergarments. If it could be worn, carried or sold, it was gone. Some accounts describe battlefields where it was impossible to tell which army the dead had belonged to, because not a single scrap of identifying equipment remained on any of them. This wasn't done gently or respectfully, or with any sense of sombre dignity. It was done fast, efficiently, and ruthlessly. Looters would roll bodies over, swiftly cut straps, wrench off rings, often breaking fingers in their haste. Some, in their avarice, would even extract teeth if they suspected gold fillings or gold teeth. It was a systematic harvest, a cold, calculated reclamation of every valuable item from thousands of corpses. And here is the truly dark, horrifying truth. Sometimes the corpses weren't actually dead yet. Accounts exist, chillingly precise, of wounded soldiers being stripped while they were still very much alive, still conscious, too weak to fight back, often paralysed by pain or injury, but horrifyingly aware enough to watch their own equipment, their very identity, being systematically taken from them. Some looters, driven by impatience or cold pragmatism, would simply kill wounded soldiers to accelerate the process. Why wait for them to die, when you could simply expedite the process and take their possessions right now? The thin, porous line between a gravely wounded soldier and a lootable corpse became terrifyingly blurry in the hours following a major battle. The initial, most valuable pickings usually went to the winning army. Soldiers were often explicitly allowed to loot as a form of payment or bonus, as medieval armies rarely had robust, consistent pay structures. So looting was understood by all as an integral part of their compensation. Finders keepers was generally the prevailing rule, though commanders might claim the finest pieces, especially high-quality armour or weapons from captured or dead nobles. But once the soldiers had taken their fill, that's when the real free-for-all began. Local peasants, who had likely been hiding in terror during the battle, would emerge from their shelters and descend upon the field like a swarm. These weren't hardened soldiers, they were poor, desperate people who saw an unprecedented opportunity. A good pair of boots could feed a family for a week. A helmet carefully cleaned and sold might cover a month's rent. So they came, in their hundreds, sometimes thousands, and they picked the field clean. And I mean clean. If the soldiers missed something, the peasants would find it. And if by some miracle the peasants missed something, there were still the professional looters. These were organised as groups, literally following armies from battle to battle, year after year, just to scavenge the aftermath. They knew precisely what they were doing. They came with carts, with tools, with established systems, working in teams, efficiently stripping bodies, sorting equipment and loading their wagons. It was like a dark, macabre parody of a harvest. The animal scavengers arrived too, adding another layer of horror to the scene. Dogs, wolves, ravens, crows, rats. A medieval battlefield became an irresistible magnet for every carnivorous animal in the region. These animals weren't just feasting on the dead, they were often competing directly with humans for the remains. Descriptions exist of looters having to actively fight off packs of dogs to reach bodies, of crows so numerous they darkened the sky, and of wolves bold enough to drag away corpses even while humans were still working nearby. Within a day or two, a battlefield initially strewn with thousands of dead would be utterly stripped clean of anything remotely valuable. All that remained were naked, often mutilated corpses, scattered bones, and the overwhelming, cloying stench of death. Every piece of equipment, every scrap of cloth, every personal item would be gone, absorbed and redistributed into the medieval economy through a vast, intricate network of sellers, traders, and specialised markets dealing in battlefield salvage. Consider the sheer economic scale of this for a moment. After a major battle, tons of metal, leather, cloth, and other raw materials would suddenly flood into the local economy. This loot would be resold, refurbished, melted down, repurposed. A knight's armour might end up adorning 5 different people. Swords would be reforged into farm tools. Shirts patched and mended would be resold in village markets, entering the humble cycles of daily life. The battlefield, in its brutal way, was feeding an entire ecosystem of commerce. Nobody thought this was particularly strange or morally objectionable. This was simply what happened. The dead, after all, had no further need for their possessions. The living, especially the poor, desperately did. Simple as that. What truly strikes me here is how thoroughly we, in our modern understanding, have decoupled economics from medieval warfare. We tend to view battles as noble, or strategic, or heroic events, but there was this whole vital layer of commerce happening, just as important, if not more so, to the vast majority of people involved. For every knight contemplating honour and glory, there were dozens, perhaps hundreds of people thinking only of how much they could loot, how much they could gain. For most of the individuals present, the common soldiers, the camp followers, the local peasants, that economic dimension probably mattered far more than any grand strategic or political objective. This was how you survived. This was how you got ahead, how you lifted your family. However briefly, above the grinding poverty of the age. The battlefield was not solely a place of death and destruction. Held in relatively comfortable conditions, perhaps even afforded courtesies. Your family would then embark on negotiations. A price would be agreed upon, the ransom paid, and you would eventually go home. Some prominent nobles were captured multiple times throughout their careers. It was entire system for the aristocratic class ran on a peculiar form of mutual trust and shared social code. But money. Your family had no money. You had no political connections, no powerful friends, nothing that made keeping you alive remotely worthwhile. Sometimes noble prisoners were so incredibly valuable that armies would actually fight each other to capture specific individuals. You could have a battle within the battle, where multiple groups of soldiers were trying to take the same high-value knight alive because whoever secured him would normal. What is universally accepted can become horrifying with the clarifying distance of time and context. The medieval battlefield aftermath, with its cold calculus of ransom and class, is a window into a world that operated on fundamentally different values than our own. A world where human life was cheaper, death was more common, and brutality was simply more accepted. Yet the people were still human. Human psychology, human fear, human grief has not changed that much. They felt pain, fear, and sorrow just as we do. They just lived within a system that channeled those feelings in profoundly different, often brutal directions.